Welcome, everybody, to another edition of the Michael Costa Show for this COVID edition. This week, our tyrannical Prime Minister, Legault, told us at the beginning of the week that we were resisting the third wave. 48 hours later, said that we're right in the middle of the third wave. I would like to ask, where of this third wave is of what? Because if it's cases, then this is total BS. Because the cases are now, with all the vaccinated people, are mostly asymptomatic young people. Then they will say the percentage of young people that are hospitalized is growing. Well, yes, because the vulnerable population is now vaccinated and protected, so they are being less hospitalized. So of course, the 0 to 59-year-old population that is in hospital did go up 21% to 34%. Well, that is because the over 60 is vaccinated, thus they are less being hospitalized. In December, 1,930 people over 90 were infected. In March of this year, 2021, it went down to 185 people over 90 that are hospitalized, that are infected, sorry. That's a 90% drop in the people over 90. In the general population, that drop is 63%. So that's your difference. And that's why the percentage of people in hospital is becoming more and more young people, even though the hospitalizations are going down. Like I will show you here, straight from the public health website of Quebec. This is the deaths here. So you see the first wave, then the summer calm, then going up in the fall, and then goes down as of end of January, beginning of February, starts going down and stabilizes since a bit before March. That is the deaths. If we go to the hospitalizations, so what you see here in the light orange is the people outside intensive care. In the old definition, the pure orange is the people out that are not in intensive care, and the red is the people in intensive care. So we see during the first wave here, then it goes down. These are the people, the red over here is the people in the intensive care. So in the orange it goes down, the first wave slows down, starts going up, and then when we hit mid-January, it starts going down again. And it's continuing going down. It hasn't been going up. We are now at 503 as of today, hospitalizations. And if we go back to the day that Legault reopened everything last summer, which was June 21st. So let's go to June 21st. June 21st, we were at 520 hospitalizations. So when he opened everything on June 21st, including restaurants, cafes, bars, we had more hospitalizations than we have now, where he's closing everything and saying we're going into the third wave. So now you see that this has nothing to do with hospitalizations or variants. Like I will show you further on in this video, that variants are not, they are, yes, more contagious, but they do not cause more deaths. And most of the people that are infected are asymptomatic. And most of the people that are vulnerable are protected now because they're vaccinated. So this is just political from now on. This is a power grab by our government. It's basically what it is. They got drunk on the power of being able to open and close the economy when as they please, businesses as they please, and now they will continue doing it because we are not going back to normal. Like I've been showing you in past COVID editions, many people are saying it. Many people are pushing for it. We are not going to go back to normal. So these are the deaths and hospitalizations in Quebec, and we have, like I show you, it has stabilized since mid-February, beginning March maybe, and it has not gone back up. Moving on. So, in the survey done by Crop, which is a survey firm, they surveyed 1,000 people between March 17th and March 23rd. And the results of that survey say 46% of the population are against the strict lockdown measures. So we're getting close to half the population is against these measures. Where's our representation in Parliament? Not only is the government pushing for these lockdown measures, stricter lockdown measures, but now we have the opposition pushing for even further lockdown measures. So now you have the media, money hungry, open quotes, experts are pushing for further lockdowns, while meanwhile, half the population is fed up. And who is representing this half of the population? Absolutely nobody. In a future video, I'll show you how we can find representation. But I'll leave that for another video. Now, these people that say, like I had a conversation with somebody, and basically they admitted to me that they're for these measures, by the way. So in full disclosure, they are for these lockdown measures. And they actually admitted to me that it's not even about the danger of infecting other people and maybe killing other people, because now that is thrown out the window. With the vulnerable being vaccinated more and more, the hospitalizations and deaths are just going to continue going down. And this person, what she admitted to me was that she is more pissed that she has to follow the measures and other people are not following the measures. Listen, if you choose to live on your knees, don't blame other people that choose freedom, and that choose to live standing up. Because like the saying goes, I'd rather die standing up than live on my knees. So this is why most of the people that are for these measures are pissed, because they choose to bend over for the government and obey these useless and authoritarian measures, while other people choose to live their lives, and that's what pisses them off. But everybody has a choice, and they choose what they should do, obviously with pondering the risks and following the measures and being careful. Following the measures, and when I'm talking about following the measures, I'm talking about social distancing, the washing of hands, even the mask. I'll even go as far as the mask. Because, look, listen, you go somewhere in and out, you need to go to a store or somewhere, you wear a mask for a few minutes, it's not the end of the world. I feel more bad is for the people working that have to wear the mask for long periods of time, for over 8 hours, let's say. I feel bad for them. But for the regular population that just need to wear the mask when they go inside a closed place, or they can't keep the social distancing of 2 meters, then doesn't make a difference. I actually made it a fashion statement, but whatever. I digress. And for those people that believe everything the government says and that believe that the government is working on your side, think again, because if history is proof of anything, is that the government doesn't work for you. The government works for themselves. So here is another story from the Gazette, March 29th. It's titled, "It's Crazy. Quebec schools were using nanoform graphene masks, says expert. The Quebec government has distributed 4.6 million of the SNN 2006 200642 masks out of the 116 million provided to schools since January. So not only did they make masks mandatory for your children in elementary schools and high schools, then they give them contaminated masks. And it's not only in elementary schools and high schools. According to Le Devoir, Quebec sent masks that were not, that weren't conform or that weren't following regulations to the daycares. So the government is sending contaminated masks to your children and obliging them to wear it. And you tell me the government is working for you, for your safety? Oh, please. It's a bunch of BS. Let me read a bit of this article. Quebec's largest school service center has withdrawn all procedural masks from its schools containing a potentially toxic material called nanoform graphene in response to a request from the Quebec government. The Centre de Services Scolaires de Montréal made this announcement Sunday while noting that the vast majority of the masks used by the CSSDM were not targeted by this recall. The masks removed were adult size, blue on one side, gray on the other. The term nanoform graphene refers to the carbon coating on the masks. Quebec's request followed a recommendation from Health Canada, which stated that it must further study the health risks of the masks in question, made by Quebec manufacturer Metallifié, with the number SNN 200642. The Quebec government has distributed 4.6 million of these masks out of the 116 million provided to schools since January. The English Montreal School Board stated on Saturday such masks were not distributed by any of our school centers. Look at that. So the government is sending your children contaminated masks, putting their lives in danger to protect them from a virus that they're not in danger of. So explain to me how that fucking makes sense. It doesn't. Well, at least some people are waking up. So there was a lawsuit in Belgium where they contested these measures, these lockdown measures in court. And the court orders Belgium in Politico reported court orders Belgium to end coronavirus measures due to insufficient legal basis. At least somebody's fighting for their constitution. That's in Belgium. Maybe it's something we should look at here in Canada, more specifically in Quebec. Here, this doctor, Sebastian Rushworth, wrote on his personal website about a study that was done about the variants and how deadly they are. So now, as mentioned, the cohort study is a type of observational study. And observational studies are rife with confounding factors that mess up the results. In order to minimize this problem as much as possible, the researchers went through and matched each person in the new variant cohort to a similar person in the old variant cohort. The cohorts were matched on date of testing in order to deal with potential biases caused by one person, for example, getting tested during the COVID peak when hospitals were overstretched, while the matched person in the other cohort got tested at a time point when nurses actually had time to fluff their pillows. The cohorts were also matched on geographical location, age, gender, and ethnicity. The endpoint that the researchers chose to look at was death within 28 days. This is a very problematic endpoint that will tend to overestimate mortality due to COVID. Basically, anyone who had a positive COVID test and who then died within the next 28 days was counted as a COVID death, even if they got hit by a bus. Apart from overestimating the COVID death rate, this could also muddy the result of the study, making it harder to see a real difference in mortality between the new variant and the older variants. if such a difference does exist, which they chose to do this rather than actually looking at death certificates to see whether COVID was listed as the cause of death or not. I really don't understand. Anyway, let's go to the results. 54,906 people with the new COVID variant were identified, and these were matched with 54,906 people with the older variants. Among those with the new variant, 227 patients died, 0.41%. Among those with the old variants, 141 people died, 0.26%. So the new variant does appear to be a little bit deadlier than the older variants, 0.15% deadlier to be precise. To put this in perspective, for every 700 people who develop COVID due to the new variant, you can expect one extra death, as compared with getting COVID due to the older variants. So for every 700 people who develop COVID with the new variant, you have one more extra death. And that's even with the methodology mistakes or problems that the study has. So, even though the variant, they say, is more contagious, it is not more deadly. Moving on. Sweden, reported in Reuters. Sweden saw lower 2020 death spike than much of Europe data. Sweden, which has shunned the strict lockdowns that have choked much of the global economy, emerged from 2020 with a smaller increase in its overall mortality rate than most European countries, an analysis of official data sources showed. Infectious disease experts cautioned that the results could not be interpreted as evidence that lockdowns were unnecessary, but acknowledged that they may indicate Sweden's overall stance on fighting the pandemic had merits worth studying. See, they're having a hard time admitting this, but they're starting to admit it. That Sweden had the right approach. In the past week, Germany and France have extended lockdowns amid rising coronavirus cases and high death tolls, moves that economists say will further delay economic recovery. While many Europeans have accepted lockdowns as a last resort given the failure to get the pandemic under control with other methods, the moves have in recent months prompted street protests in London, Amsterdam, and elsewhere. Sweden, meanwhile, has mostly relied on voluntary measures focused on social distancing, good hygiene, and targeted rules that have kept schools, restaurants, and shops largely open, an approach that has sharply polarized Swedes but spared the economy from much of the hit suffered elsewhere in Europe. Preliminary data from European Union statistics agency Eurostat, compiled by Reuters, I don't know how you pronounce that properly, showed Sweden had 7.7% more deaths in 2020 than its average for the preceding 4 years. Countries that opted for several periods of strict lockdowns, such as Spain and Belgium, had so-called excess mortality of 18.1% and 16.2% respectively. You guys, we're talking about over double of the mortality rate. 21 of the 30 countries with available statistics had higher excess mortality than Sweden. However, Sweden did much worse than its Nordic neighbors, with Denmark registering just 1.5% excess mortality and Finland 1.0%. Norway had no excess mortality at all in 2020. Sweden's excess mortality also came out at the low end of the spectrum in a separate tally of Eurostat and other data released by UK's Office for National Statistics last week. That analysis, which included an adjustment to account for differences in both the age structures and seasonal mortality patterns of countries analyzed, placed Sweden 18th in a ranking of 26. Poland, Spain, and Belgium were at the top. Sweden's chief epidemiologist, Anders Tegnell, a largely unknown figure before the pandemic, who became internationally known as the figurehead of the Swedish response, told Reuters he believed the data raised doubts about the use of lockdowns. I think people will probably think very carefully about these total shutdowns. how good they really were, he said. They may have had an effect in the short term, but when you look at it throughout the pandemic, you become more and more doubtful, said Tegno, who has received both death threats and flowers as a token of appreciation. Data caution. Other health experts warned that interpreting excess deaths data is fraught with risks of ignoring crucial variables. All of us have to be really careful interpreting death data connected with COVID 19. Whatever its source, none of them are perfect. Mark Woolhouse, professor of infectious disease epidemiology at Britain's University of Edinburgh, told Reuters. They do raise a question about whether, in fact, Sweden's strategy was relatively successful, though. They certainly raised that question, he said, commenting on data first published in Swedish media and checked by Sweden's Statistics Office. Keith Neal, University of Nottingham professor in infectious diseases, also advised caution. He cited a range of factors such as the age structure, and general health of a population, average household size, and whether a country had megacity travel hubs as significant. Sweden's proportion of people aged over 80 was 5.1% at the start of 2019, lower than the European Union average of 5.8%, but on par with United Kingdom and higher than Norway and Denmark. You see? Sweden's population is also generally healthier than the European Union average, with a life expectancy at 82.6 years in 2018 compared to an average of 81 years in the European Union. Sweden's strategy has been heavily criticized by some at home and abroad for being reckless and not enough to protect vulnerable groups from the disease. However, 43% of Swedes have high or very high confidence in how the pandemic is being handled, while 30% have low or very low confidence, according to a recent survey. Sweden's government and health authority have conceded they failed to protect Sweden's elderly, but maintained they did what they could to suppress the disease while also taking general health of the population into account. Sweden's official COVID-19 death toll is more than 13%, although some people may have died from other causes than the disease. Oh, here we go. So, when they see that Sweden took into account the collateral damage that could bring to the rest of society, well, here, this article from the New York Post, March 22nd of this year. The data shows lockdowns end more lives than they save. Pretty blunt as a headline, right? Now that the 2020 figures have been properly tallied, there is still no convincing evidence that strict lockdowns reduce the death toll from COVID-19. There is still no convincing evidence that strict lockdowns reduce the death toll from COVID-19. But one effect is clear: more deaths from other causes, especially among the young and middle-aged, minorities, and the less affluent. The best gauge of the pandemic's impact is what statisticians call excess mortality, which compares the overall number of deaths with the total in previous years. That measure rose among older Americans because of COVID-19, but it rose at an even sharper rate among people aged 15 to 54. And most of those excess deaths weren't attributed to the virus. Some of those deaths could be undetected COVID-19 cases, and some could be unrelated to the pandemic or the lockdowns. But preliminary reports point to some obvious lockdown-related factors. There was a sharp decline in visits to emergency rooms and an increase in fatal heart attacks because patients didn't receive prompt treatment. Many fewer people were screened for cancer. Social isolation contributed to excess deaths from dementia and Alzheimer's. Researchers predicted that the social and economic upheaval would lead to tens of thousands of deaths of despair from drug overdoses, alcoholism, and suicide. As unemployment surged and mental health and substance abuse treatment programs were interpreted, the reported levels of anxiety, depression, and suicidal thoughts increased dramatically, as did alcohol sales and fatal drug overdoses. The number of people killed last year in motor vehicle accidents in the United States rose to the highest level in more than a decade, even though Americans did significantly less driving than in 2019. It was the steepest annual increase in the fatality rate per mile traveled in nearly a century. For the people that don't know what a century is, it's 100 years, 100. Apparently due to more substance abuse and more high-speed driving on empty roads. The number of excess deaths not involving COVID-19 has been especially high in U.S. counties with more low-income households and minority residents who were disproportionately affected by lockdowns. Nearly 40% of workers in low-income households lost their jobs during the spring, tripled the rate in high-income households. So it's funny that the people that are pushing for stricter lockdowns are also the people that say they are allies and defenders of the minorities and the oppressed, if you will. Meaning and at the same time, the measures that they're pushing are killing these people in higher numbers. Minority-owned small businesses suffered more too. During the spring, when it was estimated that 22% of a small business closed, 32% of Hispanic owners and 41% of black owners shut down. Martin Kulldorff, a professor at Harvard Medical School, summarized the impact. Lockdowns have protected the laptop class of young, low-risk journalists, scientists, teachers, politicians, and lawyers, while throwing children, the working class, and high-risk older people under the bus. This is not a young kid on YouTube or with a second, with a grade 8 schooling, education that's saying this. Like a lot of people like to throw around on Twitter, saying that the only people that are against these measures are uneducated, selfish people, when they're the ignorant, selfish people. So I'll repeat here. Martin Kulldorff, a professor at Harvard Medical School, summarized the impact. Lockdowns have protected, here I'll highlight it for you. Lockdowns have protected the laptop class of young, low-risk journalists, scientists, teachers, politicians, and lawyers, while throwing children, the working class, and high-risk older people under the bus. The deadly impact of lockdowns will grow in future years. Due to the lasting economic and educational consequences, the United States will experience more than 1 million excess deaths in the United States during the next 2 decades. 1 million excess deaths because of these lockdowns in the next 20 years. As a result of the massive unemployment shock last year, according to a team of researchers from Johns Hopkins and Duke, who analyzed the effects of past recessions on mortality. Other researchers noting how educational levels affect income and life expectancy have projected that the learning loss from school closures will ultimately cost this generation of students more years of life than have been lost by all the victims of the coronavirus. Read that one again too. Other researchers noting how educational levels affect income and life expectancy have projected that the learning loss from school closures will ultimately cost this generation of students more years of life than have been lost by all the victims of coronavirus. So who's selfish now? The lockdowns may also have saved some lives, but there's still no good evidence. When the 50 states are ranked according to the stringency of their lockdown restrictions, you can see one obvious pattern. The more restrictive the state, the higher the unemployment rate. But there is no pattern in the rate of COVID-19 mortality. More than 24 studies have challenged the effectiveness of lockdowns, showing that closing businesses and schools does little or nothing to reduce infections and deaths from the virus. More than 24. So for the people that don't know, that's over 24 studies have challenged the effectiveness of lockdowns, showing that closing businesses and schools does little or nothing to reduce infections and deaths from the virus. So spare me your self righteous BS. If a corporation behaved this way, continuing knowingly to sell an unproven drug or medical treatment with fatal side effects, its executives would be facing lawsuits, bankruptcy, and criminal charges. But the lockdown proponents are recklessly staying the course, still insisting that lockdowns work, while it's proven that they don't. I added that part. The burden of proof rests with those imposing such dangerous policy, and they haven't met it. There is still no proof that lockdowns save any lives, let alone enough to compensate the lives they end. Folks, this piece right here says everything. And if you think that the side effects, this is only in the States, well, here from Le Devoir, up to 8,000 deaths from cancer, more up to 2025 because of the pandemic. So you could get 8,000 more deaths of cancer from now to 2025 because of the pandemic. And then you say, people, why governments shut stores down, little mom and pop stores, restaurants, and etc. Well, somebody's winning in all this, while every regular Joe, middle class, loses their business, their livelihoods. Kids are more stressful, depressed, anxious, anxiety. Meanwhile, billionaires made $3.9 trillion during the pandemic, enough to pay for everyone's vaccine. An Oxfam report found billionaires' wealth increased by 3.9% at 3.9 trillion between March 18th and December 30th, 2020. The increase of the world's 10 richest billionaires could pay for everyone to get vaccinated and stay out of poverty. The report recommends wealth taxes as one step. Okay, blah, blah, blah already. So this is Bloomberg, or Business Insider, sorry, pushing for a wealth tax. But the article is still relatively important, so I'll still read it. A new report from Oxfam found that the world's billionaires didn't just recoup losses from the coronavirus. Their collective wealth increase could pay for the entire world's vaccinations and prevent anyone from falling into poverty. So, while you close middle class businesses, and now everybody's ordering from Amazon, so Bezos becomes one of the richest men in the world, if not the richest man in the world. His wealth increases really at a high rate, if you will. But not only him. So now all these corporations are Skip the Dishes, Uber Eats. They're the ones who are the winners in all this. While the little restaurant or pizza place can't open. The increase in wealth of the 10 richest billionaires since the crisis began is more than enough to prevent anyone on earth from falling into poverty because of the virus and to pay for a COVID-19 vaccine for all, the report said. Worldwide, billionaires saw their wealth increase by 3.9 trillion between March 18th and December 31st, 2020. While billionaires saw initial losses at the start of the pandemic, like millions of others around the globe, the report says that they had recovered all losses by November. Meanwhile, recovery for those at the bottom could take up to a decade. The report also estimates that between 200 million to 500 million people may have fallen into poverty during 2020. Between 200 million and 500 million because of these lockdowns. They keep on saying because of the pandemic. It's not because of the pandemic, it's because of the government lockdowns. American billionaires have already seen huge gains throughout the pandemic. Insider reported in December that American billionaires had seen their net worth grow 4 trillion throughout the pandemic. At the time, the top 10 richest were worth over 1 trillion, a little more than half the value of President Biden's proposed stimulus package. Those gains were more than the cost of sending a 3,000 stimulus check to every single American. In recent months, 8 million Americans have fallen into poverty, insiders Elliot Shafi reported. Worldwide Oxfam reports that the collective worth of billionaires is 11.95 trillion, which is the equivalent to what G20 governments have spent in response to the pandemic. That's funny, eh? So, the government puts all these businesses in lockdown, out of business basically, shuts them down, then throws them taxpayer money for them to try to survive. And surprisingly, the exact amount that the government gave to these people or spend on keeping people's heads out of the water is the exact amount that these billionaires raised their wealth by 11.95 trillion. Interesting, isn't it? Excuse me. So here, Massachusetts psychiatrists concerned about increase in suicidal thoughts attempts among adolescents. The effects of the pandemic on mental health in the US are profound, but clinicians who work with children say they're particularly concerned about one trend over the last several months: a spike in adolescents who have suicidal thoughts or have tried to take their lives. Boston's Children's Hospital reports that between July and October of last year, it saw a 47% increase over the same period the year before in kids needing to be hospitalized for suicidal ideation or attempts. 47% increase in suicidal attempts in teenagers. And you still think that these lockdowns are to protect you? Please. The damages, when everything is said and done, the side effects or collateral damage of these lockdowns is going to be far worse than any COVID deaths. That's a fact. So now, when people call me selfish for fighting against these measures, they're the ones who are selfish. Because of them supporting these measures, teenagers are 40% higher risk of attempting or having suicidal thoughts. Plus what I showed you in that New York Post article with all the other side effects or collateral damage, if you will. Let me read you this letter. I think it's important. By Gert Vanden Bosch, DMV PhD, independent virologist and vaccine expert formerly employed at Gavi, which is Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, funded by them, and used to also work for that foundation. To all authorities, scientists, and experts around the world to whom this concerns the entire world population, I am all but an anti-vaxxer. As a scientist, I do not usually appeal to any platform of this kind to make a stand on vaccine-related topics. As a dedicated virologist and vaccine expert, I only make an exception when health authorities allow vaccines to be administered in ways that threaten public health. Most certainly when scientific evidence is being ignored. The present extremely critical situation forces me to spread this emergency call as the unprecedented extent of human intervention in the COVID 19 pandemic is now at risk of resulting in a global catastrophe without equal. This call cannot sound loudly and strongly enough. I'm not going to read the rest of the letter because it might get me in trouble with Facebook and YouTube. But this is not me saying it. This is Gert Vanden Bosch, DMV PhD, an independent virologist and vaccine expert that worked at Gavi and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. But what he says here is troubling. And I'm not an anti-vaxxer. I believe vaccines are a great innovation, and the scientists that work on these vaccines are mostly honorable people. But when you produce a vaccine so fast, and it being a new technology of vaccines, this must take time and be tested and make sure it is safe. And yet, what we see, the evidence keeps on coming more and more. There might be a problem with these vaccines. I'm not saying not to take them. My father took them, my mother, my grandmother took them. I told them, go right ahead. It's your choice. If you want to take them, go right ahead. When it's going to get to my turn, I might take it, I might not. But the more you try to push me to take it, the more I don't want to take it. And if they oblige me through the back door with a vaccine passport, then I'm definitely not taking it. Here's another doctor. So people can stop saying this is coming from an uneducated YouTuber. It's not me saying it. These are experts, doctors, scientists. Risk of asymptomatic spread minimal. Variants overhyped. Mask pointless. An interview with Professor J. Bhattacharya. Sorry if I'm not pronouncing that right. New variants are of no concern. There is no need to cancel summer holidays. Millions vaccinated, coupled with immunity from millions of prior infections, means we can surf on the crest of the third wave, rather than being remotely concerned about it. In fact, the UK should open now, and vaccine passports, certificates, or whatever name they are being given will do nothing to improve the health of the population. All headlines we have read and heard over the past week or so. Except we haven't. We have heard and read the opposite, and we are instilled with fear from TV and radio adverts, complete with that scary voice, all too eager to give listeners nightmares. Be it your impressionable primary school-age daughter or a frail older lady now terrified into wearing a mask outside while waiting for a bus with no one within a 50-meter radius. But the reality is that the above headlines could have been written, and all based on science. Jayanta Bhattacharya is a professor of medicine at Stanford University. Not a YouTuber. Professor of medicine at Stanford University. And one of the co-authors of the Great Barrington Declaration, the report that called for the focused protection of the vulnerable and no lockdowns, which what I've been calling since March of last year. Go back and read my Facebook posts. They're all there. When I say let's protect the vulnerable, but let's not close stuff down, this is not going to work. And I ain't no expert, but I was right. Signed by almost 14,000 medical and public health scientists, nearly 42,000 medical practitioners, and close to 765,000 concerned citizens. So 14,000 medical and public health scientists, nearly 42,000 medical practitioners, and close to 800,000 concerned citizens. I interviewed him by email, and he remains a staunch lockdown skeptic. So I'll just read you this. We have the media, politicians, and many scientists sought to panic the populace about SARS-CoV-2 far beyond what the evidence would warrant. The initiatives The incentives, include financial motives, political goals, the desire to protect professional reputations, and many other factors. The virus is seasonal, and late fall winter is its season. It is very unlikely, given that this is the case, that the virus will spread very widely during the summer months. It is also the case that a large fraction of the UK population has already been infected or vaccinated and is immune, which will greatly reduce hospitalization and mortality from the virus in coming months. There are tens of thousands of mutations of the SARS-CoV-2 virus. They mutate because the replication mechanisms they induce involve very little error checking. Most of the mutations either do not change the virulence of the virus or weaken it. There are a few mutations that provide the virus with selective advantage in infectivity and may increase its lethality very slightly, though the evidence on this latter point is not solid. We should not be particularly concerned about the variants that have arisen to date. First, prior infection with the wild-type virus and vaccination provide protection against severe outcomes arising from reinfection with the mutated virus. Second, though, the mutants have taken over the few remaining cases, their rise has coincided with a sharp drop in cases and deaths, even in countries where they have come to dominate. Their selective infectivity advantage has not been enough to cause a resurgence in cases. Third, the age gradient in mortality is the same for the mutant and the wild-type virus. Thus, a focused protection policy is still warranted. If lockdowns could not stop the less infectious wild-type virus, why would we expect them to stop the more infectious mutant virus? Folks, this is it. This is what it is, man. And if you think we're going back to normal, it's not happening. They don't want us to go back to normal. And that's why we're going to keep on going in through waves. We must start a planning for a permanent pandemic. With coronavirus mutations pitted against vaccinations in a global arms race, we may never go back to normal. Bloomberg. Published in Bloomberg, March 24th of this year, last week. Let me read you that headline again. I'm not going to read you the article because I'm not going to give them the satisfaction. But we must start planning for a permanent pandemic. With coronavirus mutations pitted against vaccinations in a global arms race, we may never go back to normal. Folks, if you think that by staying home, it's going to speed up the reopening and us going back to living a normal life, you're wrong. The only thing that's going to bring us back to living a normal life is if you stand up and you fight these government measures. It's the only way. If that's not going to work, nothing will work. But one thing is certain. Staying home and thinking by staying home this is going to end quicker and you're going to get your normal life back, that's not going to happen. We got to stand up. I'll be coming up with some ideas. I know I've said that before, but I was thinking, and I think I've come up with the only way we could. But it'll be for a future video. So guys, today from an undisclosed location, like you guys have noticed, that I cannot mention because it might be forbidden. This was the Michael Costa Show. Hope you enjoyed. Hope to see you soon. Peace out. Hello everybody. This past weekend when I recorded the latest episode of the Michael Costa Show, the COVID edition, I forgot to mention you a few things and show you a few things. So before I put out my video, I would like to add those to that episode. So here goes. So when I was talking about jurisdictions and lockdowns not being the way to fight this pandemic, like I've been saying for the past several months, if not a year, like for example, Texas lifting their mask mandates and opening up their economy at full capacity. This was March 3rd, right here, where Texas lifting their mask mandates was called a Neanderthal thinking, and that they were not following the science, like Missouri, New Jersey, and New York. Well, on that day, Texas has been continuously going down. While, mysteriously, the ones that continue with the mask mandate and the lockdown measures are starting to go back up. That's interesting. And if we go, when Texas instated their mask mandate July 2nd, it went up and then went down. And then I had another wave going up. And then they lifted everything on March 10th when they said, the media and certain politicians said that there would be a zombie apocalypse. Well, that was March 10th. We are now April 5th, and cases continue going down. I will show you even here. If we compare Texas right here, and if we go back to March 10th, yes, it was March 10th. We go, the cases, 5,350 and 2,252 on, 1,012 on April 4th. This is Texas. So cases have gone down dramatically since they lifted the lockdown measures completely and lifted the mask mandate. So if you look at, that was Texas. If you look at Florida, their cases have been stabilized probably since February 18th about. Have been around the same thing. If we go look at now, they're at 4,000. There might have been going up a bit, but slightly. It's the 7-day average is about the same at 5,424. And if we go look at when they started stabilizing, at 6,000 on February 19th. So, and they've lifted their lockdown measures and their mask mandates even before Texas. So now if we look at Canada, which has the strictest measures in North America, we can see that if we compare on the same date, right, when it stabilized around February 15th, we're at an average of a 7-day average of 3,000 cases. On that day, 2,500 cases. And we are still in lockdown. Everything is closed. Measures, mask mandates still in place. And since then, they started going up. And we are now at, for April 4th, 2,343 new cases, but a 7-day average of 5,263. So we can see that lockdowns are not, yet again, the way to fight this pandemic, or to fight the spread, if you will. These things don't work. And these politicians know this, because they have this data to look at. And like I shown you early on in the video, like we saw with Sweden, many specialists, experts, scientists, doctors are starting to point this out publicly with the courage needed, because some of their orders of their professions might punish them, but they're still speaking out because they have a right to, and they have a duty to speak out. So we see that lockdowns are not the answer. Yet again, I'm repeating myself, but it's what it is. And if more and more people stand up and talk against this, maybe the government will wake up, but I doubt it. I want to finish this video with a public health professor, what she said on Chris Cuomo's show on CNN.
clear to them that the vaccine is the ticket back to pre-pandemic life. And the window to do that is really narrowing. I mean, you were mentioning, Chris, about how all these states are reopening. They're reopening at 100%. And we have a very narrow window to tie reopening policy to vaccination status. Because otherwise, if everything is reopened, then what's the carrot going to be? How are we going to incentivize people to actually get the vaccine? So that's why I think the CDC and the Biden administration needs to come out a lot bolder and say, if you're vaccinated, you can do all these things. Here are all these freedoms that you have. Because otherwise, people are going to go out and enjoy these freedoms anyway.
So you see what they're actually admitting here is that by these places opening and not having any problems, it serves a problem to them that want a majority of people vaccinated. And I wonder why. I don't know, but I'm asking the question. And she said that we need to keep things closed so people feel incentivized to take the vaccine, even though the people that reopened are not seeing a spike in cases. So that should tell you a lot about what these people want. They want control. It's all about control. They want the control to force you to have the vaccine, even though you might not need it. And then this one is really, really special. This one is really special. It's basically a commercial of celebrities telling you about this new seal of approval that stores or businesses will have that you can see. But listen for yourself.
If you want to get back to your favorite places and feel confident they have put your health and safety first,
look for the Well Health Safety Seal.
Look for the Well Health Safety Seal.
Look for the Well Health Safety Seal.
I'm Dr. Richard Carmona, the 17th Surgeon General of the United States of America. This is the Well Health Safety Seal from the International Well Building Institute, the global authority on healthy buildings.
The Well Health Safety Rating was informed by years of research and input from hundreds of leading virologists, public health experts, epidemiologists, and building professionals around the world.
Wait a second. Years of research when this virus has only been around for 1 year. So what does years of research mean when they put this stamp of approval or seal of approval on businesses, meaning they're healthy and it was approved by virologists after research of many years? But SARS-CoV-2 has only been around for 1 year.
You'll see it at schools, offices, banks, childcare centers, all the places we go.
The Well Health Safety Seal means that we'll feel better going into restaurants,
theaters, stores, hotels,
stadiums, and all the places that we love.
Everything may look the same, but the Well Health Safety Seal means that your health and safety are top of mind when it comes to
cleaning and sanitizing procedures,
air and water quality management,
emergency preparedness programs,
and health services.
So look for the Well Health Safety Seal outside
and feel more confident going inside. Learn more about the Well Health Safety Rating.
Well, thanks to these celebrities, I now know not to bring my business to any place that has a Well Health Safety Seal rating on their window or door. Thanks, celebrities, for letting me know where to shop. You guys are the best. All right, guys, that was my episode for today. Hope you enjoy. Hope to see you soon.